the circle be unbroken by and by.
I really think it represents the pinnacle of storytelling in games.
The Last of Us is just, it's a masterpiece.
When it comes to Bioshock Infinite, there was never a moment where I was able to put down my controller.
It's a beautiful piece of gaming history that will be looked upon fondly for the rest of gaming's history.
Where do I want to start with The Last of Us? It's beautiful. One, it looks probably better than any game that came out that generation. When I've been playing it again recently, and when I look at it, it doesn't look like a current gen game or a last gen game, I guess now. It looks like a next gen. It looks like the kind of realism that I want out of a next gen game. The kind of style, the art style, the realism, like the way you can see the layers of hair in Joel's beard or something.
The world of Columbia was just visually fantastic. I loved that classic Americana aesthetic. It's something you don't see in a lot of games.
The game is just amazing. I'm more of a fan of the art style with it specifically over the original Bioshock. Very bright open world when you see the sky and this whole utopia of just always this eerie vibe. Like, it's a nice place, but there's some weird undertone to it, and I love that about the Bioshock games. Again, aesthetically, it's just I like the art style of it. Not to say over The Last of Us. The Last of Us is a gorgeous game, and it has a completely insane, realistic look to it. But just the way that Elizabeth looks, her face, like you can sense this cartoony look to it. The steampunk style, I guess you can say, because of the era that it takes place in, and the weapons and the hook.
It plays fantastically, and I know people had problems with the way The Last of Us played, and I just didn't have those problems. For me, every moment was tense. Every time I'm crafting in the middle of a big gunfight, every time there's a battle happening, every time I'm fighting against the odds, there are 5 guys and it's just me and Ellie, it was exhilarating, in a terrifying kind of way. Not because I felt like this was a challenge I can overcome, but because I felt like it was a challenge I couldn't overcome. All the odds were against me, and fighting 2 guys is 2 against 1. It's not like 2 guys pop. Those bullets could be used for clickers. Those bullets are precious ammo. Maybe I only have 1 bullet left. Every moment like that is what made The Last of Us special. And when you tie gameplay into what the game is actually trying to tell you about these 2 characters who are actually trying to survive against the odds, then that game should make you feel like you're trying to survive against the odds, and The Last of Us does that.
Even in the actual playing of the game, you're never jumping over a ledge and just punching through someone, never feeling the impact. You have to work to kill some of these creatures, and most of these creatures still resemble you. So when you're choking the life out of a runner, you're choking the life out of someone who isn't much different than you, except for the fact that they can't control themselves. And they're not super brain dead. They know they used to be someone like you. So when you're choking them out, you're going to hear them gasp, and when you're stalking one, they're going to be screaming. They might be mumbling real human intelligible words to themselves. And you have to come to terms with the fact that they're in pain, so are you, but it's either you or me.
I would play it for so long, and I'd play it for 4 to 5 hours and not realize it because I was so immersed in the gameplay. Because with Booker and the combat that you have, there's really nothing that you can't do, and to be able to just fly around on a skyhook all day.
The combat in Bioshock Infinite was fantastic. It was fun. It was you were really encouraged to experiment with different combinations of not only the plasmas but the weapons as well. You could do whatever you wanted. You didn't feel like you had to do a certain thing to beat a certain enemy. There were a lot of different ways you could tackle them. So it always kept combat fresh and really exciting.
Which is another thing, the hook, the whole elevation of the game is just taking you shooting through skylines, and it's just ridiculously fun.
Yeah, I think when we look back on 2013, this is going to be seen as a milestone year for writing and storytelling in video games. You know, we had games like Gone Home and The Last of Us, but Bioshock Infinite for me stands on top of all those because it's so open to interpretation and analysis. You know, it's like a novel or a film.
It's just one of those games that has sparked so much discussion amongst people that I was on a car ride a couple months ago with my friend, and we killed a solid hour just talking about where could the next Bioshock game take, what era, where, because they've already been in the sea, they were in the sky, maybe now it'll be on land. My friend said maybe the moon, who knows. It's that discussion that, yeah, you can get from games like GTA, but that's a different kind of discussion. Those are, oh, I remember this one time I did this one time I did that, but with a game like Bioshock where it's such a linear story, you're all getting that same experience, but there's more to it than just the experience. There's a deeper level in terms of how you perceive the game. Do you think this person, because I don't want to spoil the game, but how do you think it could have been different? Do you think it could have been avoided? You're trying to find plot holes, and there's been so many articles about different takes on it, and that's something that, like I said, you don't get much in games. It happens quite frequently in movies, like, you know, Christopher Nolan movies that really try to mess with you, like Inception, and something you just don't get in games, and Bioshock Infinite did that for me, and I love that. I'm a very cerebral person, and if I have a game that challenges my thought, I think that's great. That's fantastic.
I mean, Bioshock Infinite deals with themes that are as old as storytelling itself. It's very human. It deals with choices, how our choices impact our lives, how they impact other people's lives, different paths we could take in our lives.
I knew that there was more to the story, and to see the way that Booker and Elizabeth played off each other, like the bronze and the brains, I didn't feel right putting down the controller, because at some point I had just made such a connection with the two.
You know, it deals with growing up. You see Elizabeth go from this young girl trapped in a tower, kind of scared, kind of naive, and you know, she slowly grows into this very strong, independent young woman over the course of the game.
I mean, it takes some of the best parts from Bioshock, the original, and it's integrated into Columbia and Bioshock Infinite. Such detail that's in the storyline there at the end. It's one of those where you kind of almost have to go back and play through the story again so you can really understand everything that's happening. But at the same time, you're okay about doing that, because it's one of those games that you can never get tired of, just because of how incredible it is. And not a whole lot of games can say that. And I think that's what makes Bioshock Infinite the best game of 2013, because of its attention to detail, not only in your combat design and gameplay, but also just in the characters themselves and how they bond off of one another. And I think that's what it comes down to in regards to Bioshock Infinite being the best game of 2013.
Bioshock has always had an amazing, intriguing, very deep psychological storytelling to it, and that last half hour when everything pieces together, that whole journey that you just went through just comes together, and I can't even explain that moment. That's something I don't get in games enough. I still remember that after the credits started rolling, I dropped the controller and I called my friend and I just screamed in his ear, holy, shit.
Anyone can see a zombie and know what to do. Anyone can see a group of people living in a refugee zone, knowing that there's hunters and cannibals and whatever running around. We've seen that before too. So it's a real feat when someone can take these things that have been done so many times, especially in the past couple years, and make it something so profound. It's not about zombies, it's not about stealth really, it's about the people. It's about what human beings, when we're pushed to our limits, how varied we can become. Most games are about making each character a facet of humanity, a facet of characterisms. You'll always find a super villain who's always very proudly, stoically one thing. Every single character in The Last of Us could be a hero one day and a villain the other. And the truth is, so could any one of us. And that, such a humanistic touch to video games is what it's all about.
It's something that when it was behind me, and when I'm sitting there, the credits are rolling, and I literally have nothing to say, you know, just from a story perspective, it left me speechless. The ending was perfect, you know. How could it be anything else, you think? And you look at what other people wanted to happen, and there's a lot less of that with The Last of Us. There's a lot less of, I wanted a happy ending, I wanted a sad ending, I wanted it to be real, and it felt real, you know. People weren't complaining about the ending, you know, people weren't complaining about the story, and I think that's something that should be noted. You know, story in games is always criticized, it's always given the hard edge, you know. With Mass Effect, this big story-driven trilogy ending in such a clusterfuck, and The Last of Us, one singular story that more people are attached to, you know, those characters, then that just goes to show that Naughty Dog knows what it's doing. It can make you more attached to two characters in one game than Mass Effect can in 3.
At first glance, The Last of Us is like any other game. You're a guy in a third-person view, running around, shooting enemies, punching them in the face, platforming, doing a little bit of puzzling, taking this little girl from point A to point B. Not only has most of those tropes been done in gaming before, most of those tropes have been done in gaming this year. But it's easy to sit down and watch The Last of Us from afar and say it's like any other game in the industry, but once you play it and sit down and you finish it and you watch the credits roll, you realize there really is nothing like The Last of Us. It takes 30 years of gaming history and turns it into such a raw, distilled version of itself. It turns gaming history into what a lot of the uppity members of the gaming community always try to argue is art. This is one of the first games you'll play. Anyone can play. Anyone who's played games before, if you've never played games before, if you only watch movies about games, and you pick up The Last of Us, you'll believe games are art after this.
It's not one part of it is better than the other. It looks great, yes. I think it plays great. I think the interesting mechanics and the tight gameplay and the lack of loading screens, I think that's all great. But it all comes together. That's the point, you know. A masterpiece isn't just some game that has really great visuals and that just kind of lifts the other weaker parts of the game up. No, it's something where everything is a cohesive piece to a bigger cohesive whole. And they're all working together and shifting and using each part to create something, one whole, that is better than each individual parts, a sum of its parts, you know? And The Last of Us is that. Looks great, plays great, and it makes you feel, you know? It's got that story. 3 components that, you know, maybe one game did story better, maybe one game did gameplay better, but they didn't do them all so well. That's why The Last of Us is special.
In 10 years or 15 years, people are going to look back at the industry, and The Last of Us will still be a game people are talking about. It's surreal. People still talk about Mario because they still make Mario games. But there's not going to be a decades-long Last of Us series. This game is bigger than me right now. It's bigger than this industry right now. And that's why The Last of Us is not only the game of the year, it might be the game of the industry.
God, I can't say enough about that game. Much like Journey, it's a game I have only played through once, and I hope to go back to it as soon as the next DLC comes out. But the big thing with that for me being is I played that game on launch in February, and I still have it all right in my head. I still remember every story beat, every moment that had me like confused and just so blown away. that I can still talk about it with friends who just played it last week, and it'd be like I don't forget a single part of it.
And I think it merits comparison to games like Bioshock. Bioshock does what it wants to do. It does its style. It doesn't do realism. It does sci-fi. And it does it exceedingly well. And people complained about Bioshock, having lost its way by the end of that game, having become too personal a story. And I disagree. I think a personal story is better. And I think that's why The Last of Us is a better game, because it's a better personal story wrapped around more interesting mechanics, and the execution is better. But that's not to take anything away from Bioshock Infinite. Infinite does spectacular things, just in a different way, and I don't think it did them as well.
Endure and survive.
Excuse me?
Savage Starlight. That comic I've been reading? That's what the hero says after a big battle.
Endure and survive.
Yeah.
Okay.